The moment began with a sharp, sinking feeling in my stomach. I was standing in the living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished wood floor. Dad was in his usual leather armchair, that expression on his face like he was delivering a corporate presentation rather than talking to his own daughter. Mom was perched on the couch, hands folded neatly, but I could see the tension in the way her shoulders trembled. Victoria, my twin, was already at the window, tapping furiously on her phone, completely absorbed in whatever world existed outside our walls. And there I was, clutching my acceptance letter, the paper sweating in my grip as though it knew my parents' verdict would determine my future. Victoria will cover your full tuition at Whitmore, Dad said, voice calm, measured. I remember the way Victoria's face lit up, her squeal of joy piercing the room like a bell. Mom smiled, warm, reassuring, nodding as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Then came my turn. I felt my chest tighten as Dad turned his gaze toward me. "Francis," he said slowly, "we've decided not to fund your education." I froze. The words hung in the air like an invisible chain, tightening with every second. My brain struggled to process. Not fund my education? I had always imagined this moment differently. My parents congratulating me, their pride tangible, their love unquestionable. Instead, I felt an icy emptiness. Dad continued, and the words were like knives sliding across my ribs. "You're smart, Francis, but you're not special. There's no return on investment with you. You'll have to figure it out yourself." I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She didn't have to. Her silence was an answer all its own. I looked at Victoria, who was already texting someone, probably announcing her triumph, and just like that, the room that had always felt like home transformed into a battlefield where I had been deemed unworthy before the fight even began. But I didn't cry. Not then. I had cried too many times before, over birthdays ignored, presents passed down, family photos where I was cropped out. Instead, I sat in my room that night, the words echoing in my mind. "You're not worth the investment." And for the first time, I realized something profound. To them, I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't even a priority. I was a mistake, a bad investment, a placeholder. The irony of it was staggering. Victoria got everything. She was the favorite, the golden child, the one the world would be forced to notice. I got scraps, hand-me-downs, and silent judgment. At 16, Victoria got a brand new Honda Civic with a red bow on top. I got her old laptop with a cracked screen and a battery that lasted barely 40 minutes. Family vacations? She had her own hotel room. I slept in hallways, on pull-out couches, once even in a cozy nook in the corner of a resort. Every memory, every photo, every milestone seemed to whisper one cruel truth. I was invisible. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was woven into the very fabric of our family. And when I finally confronted Mom at 17, desperate for answers, she sighed. "Sweetheart, you're imagining things. We love you both the same." Actions, I thought bitterly, don't lie. That night, I made a decision I would carry silently for years. I wouldn't ask for their help. I wouldn't wait for them to notice me. I would prove my worth, not to them, but to myself. And so began the journey that would consume every ounce of my determination, every night studying under the dim light of my desk lamp, every early morning and late night of balancing jobs, classes, and dreams. Looking back, that moment in the living room, Dad's words, Mom's silence, Victoria's excitement, was the true beginning. It wasn't just about college. It was about recognition, about control, about proving that my existence had value. Little did they know, their decision had sparked a fire they couldn't even imagine, a fire that would burn through the assumptions of who I was and who I could become. Even now, I can see it clearly. The stripes of sunlight across the floor, the leather of Dad's chair, Mom's nervous hands, Victoria's oblivious grin. It was a perfect picture of what a family could look like on the surface, while underneath, a storm was already gathering. And I was ready to weather it. Quietly, strategically, and with the kind of resolve that only comes from knowing you have nothing to lose and everything to prove. That evening, as I closed my bedroom door and sat on the floor with my acceptance letter, I whispered to myself the truth that would guide me for the next 4 years. If they won't invest in me, I will invest in myself, and I will make them see it, whether they like it or not. Little did I know, this wasn't just a lesson in independence, it was the first move in a long, calculated game, a game where the board had been rigged against me from the start, and the stakes were my own identity, my dignity, and eventually the recognition that would shock the very people who had dismissed me. And in that living room, in that single, unforgettable conversation, the story of my life was rewritten. The rest of the world didn't know it yet. Not my parents, not Victoria, but I did. And that knowledge would become my most powerful weapon. I didn't cry that night, but I knew one thing. 4 years from now, they would witness something they could never unsee. The question was, would they recognize me at all when the time came? The next morning, the house seemed impossibly large, echoing with the laughter and footsteps of a family that didn't really see me. Victoria was already at the breakfast table, sipping her overpriced latte, scrolling through her phone as if she owned the world. Mom glanced at me once, then away, her gaze avoiding the conflict she refused to acknowledge. Dad grunted something about schedules and responsibilities, never noticing the weight of the storm still hanging in the air. And me? I poured cereal into a bowl, watched the milk swirl, and tasted nothing. That day marked the beginning of the real challenge, surviving a family that had decided I wasn't worth investing in, while secretly carrying the fire of proving them wrong. I took on every small job I could find, tutoring kids in math, babysitting the neighbor's dog, delivering groceries for cash. Every penny earned felt like a tiny victory, a small rebellion against a world that had dismissed me as unworthy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria had the luxury of being spoiled, while I had to fight for scraps. But that fight was sharpening me, teaching me the kind of resilience no privilege could buy. School became my battlefield, while Victoria coasted through her classes, chatting with friends, attending club meetings, and effortlessly charming teachers. I immersed myself in every opportunity I could seize. I stayed after school for extra projects, volunteered for leadership roles that no one else wanted, and studied late into the night, often falling asleep with textbooks stacked around me like a fortress. My grades weren't just grades, they were ammunition, proof that the world couldn't underestimate me without consequence. And then came the planning. While my family assumed I was quietly struggling, I was quietly strategizing. I started small, researching scholarships, grants, and programs that could give me leverage. Every application I filled out was a calculated move. Every essay a weapon crafted to prove my worth. I learned to play the system, to anticipate what scholarship committees wanted to see: resilience, determination, ambition. I presented a version of myself that was polished and impressive, carefully hiding the anger and disappointment that fueled my late-night studies. But the hardest part wasn't finding opportunities, it was hiding the fire. At home, I had to act normal, the dutiful daughter who obeyed, stayed quiet, and let Victoria shine. I had to smile when Dad praised her, nod when Mom asked how Victoria was doing, and laugh when Victoria joked about my lack of initiative. Every interaction was a performance, a careful mask that concealed the storm brewing inside. I became an expert at pretending, because letting them see my determination too early would have made them try to control or sabotage it. The real breakthrough came when I stumbled upon a scholarship that seemed almost impossible to get. It was prestigious, competitive, and promised full coverage, tuition, housing, even a small stipend for living expenses. Most students didn't even apply because they assumed they couldn't win. But I saw it differently. This was my way out, my ticket to independence, my first real step toward turning the tables. I spent weeks crafting my application, refining my essays, and gathering letters of recommendation. I even reached out to teachers I barely knew, explaining my goals and why I deserved their support. Every step was meticulous, every detail designed to make me stand out. At night, I kept a journal not just of my plans, but of my observations. I noted Victoria's routines, Mom's habits, Dad's patterns. I mapped the house in my mind, understanding when and where I could work without interruption, when I could submit applications without interference, when I could prepare for interviews unnoticed. To an outsider, it might have seemed obsessive. To me, it was survival. It was strategy. It was preparation for the moment when I would finally reclaim the power they had stolen from me. The tension in the house became palpable. Victoria would brag about her successes at the dinner table, assuming I was powerless to compete. Mom would praise her endlessly, oblivious to the fact that I was quietly outperforming her twin in ways they would never imagine. Dad remained blind, confident that his judgment was infallible, that I would eventually conform to the role they had assigned me. But every day I grew stronger, smarter, more resourceful. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing to rewrite the rules of the game entirely. And then, one evening, I hit a breakthrough. The scholarship committee responded with an invitation to an interview. My heart raced. This was it, the first real crack in the fortress my family had built around me. I stayed up all night preparing, rehearsing answers, anticipating questions, imagining every scenario. For the first time, I felt the taste of real possibility, the chance to step out of their shadow and prove that my life didn't belong to their judgment. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about money or college. It was about respect, about dignity, about finally taking control of a life that had been dictated by others for too long. Every sleepless night, every moment of silent suffering, every ounce of determination, it all led to this. And I knew, when the time came, I would strike, not with anger, not with revenge, but with undeniable success. The plan was clear. Work hard, hide my progress, secure the scholarship, and then when the time was right, let the results speak louder than their judgment ever could. Little did they know, the quiet, underestimated daughter they ignored was already becoming someone they would one day wish they had never dismissed. I had the scholarship interview, I had the plan, I had the fire. All that was left was one step, stepping into the battlefield and proving that everything they assumed about me was wrong. The day of the scholarship interview arrived faster than I had imagined. I remember waking up before sunrise, my stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. The house was quiet. Victoria had left early for some brunch with her friends, and Mom and Dad were still asleep. For once, the solitude felt like an ally rather than a burden. I dressed carefully, every detail chosen to project confidence without arrogance. The reflection in the mirror stared back at me, determined, composed, and ready to fight for a future they had never imagined I could claim. The drive to the interview felt surreal. I replayed my rehearsed answers over and over in my mind, imagining the panel, their questions, their expressions. Every challenge I had faced up to this point, the endless tutoring jobs, the silent suffering, the sneers of my family, had prepared me for this moment. I wasn't just applying for a scholarship. I was stepping into my first real battlefield, armed with years of unnoticed determination. Walking into the interview room, I immediately noticed the panel of judges. There were 4 of them, each with their own air of authority and scrutiny. Their questions began almost immediately, probing into my background, my ambitions, and my motivations. I spoke with clarity, honesty, and conviction. I told them about my journey, not the victimized version, but the one that highlighted my grit, my resourcefulness, and my refusal to be defeated. I spoke about every tutoring job, every late night study session, every moment I had turned adversity into strength. By the end of the interview, I felt an unusual calm, a sense that I had finally shown the world the person I truly was. Weeks passed in agonizing suspense. During this time, life at home remained unchanged. Or so it seemed. Victoria continued to flaunt her privileges, unaware that I was quietly building a path that would soon eclipse hers. Mom would casually mention Victoria's accomplishments, still blind to the quiet victories I was achieving behind closed doors. Dad remained confident in his judgment, assuming I would eventually conform. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the first signs of change began to appear. I received an email confirming that I had been shortlisted for the scholarship. My heart raced. This was more than a win. It was validation, proof that every effort, every sacrifice, every ounce of determination had not gone unnoticed. I continued to push myself further. I secured a part-time internship at a local business, applying lessons I had learned from my small jobs in real-world situations. I organized my time meticulously, balancing schoolwork, scholarship preparation, and my internship. Each success was a quiet whisper of rebellion against the family that had underestimated me for so long. Slowly, my confidence grew, no longer tethered to anyone's approval. I was proving to myself, more than anyone else, that I had control over my destiny. Then came the scholarship result. The email appeared in my inbox one evening while Victoria was complaining about her lunch plans. My hands trembled as I clicked to open it. Accepted. Full scholarship granted. I couldn't contain the tears. This wasn't just a letter, it was a ticket to independence, a statement that my efforts, though invisible to my family, had tangible power. I had won against odds they hadn't even realized existed. The first time I let myself celebrate was in the quiet of my room. No one else was around, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. It wasn't about revenge or proving Victoria wrong. It was about finally claiming the recognition I had earned. I allowed myself to savor it, to let the realization sink in that the trajectory of my life had shifted. From this point forward, I was no longer constrained by their judgments, their favoritism, or their ignorance. I had taken control. Back at home, things started to subtly shift. I began applying the same strategies I had used for the scholarship in other areas of my life. I improved my grades even further, started networking with mentors and professionals in fields I was passionate about, and took on projects that showcased my abilities. Victoria remained blissfully unaware, thinking her position of superiority was unchallenged. Mom occasionally glanced at my achievements, but her praise was superficial, hesitant, and often reserved for Victoria. Dad, ever confident in his judgment, still assumed I was following a predictable path. They didn't see the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. This period was also a turning point in my internal mindset. I realized that power wasn't about being loud or visible. It was about strategy, patience, and timing. I learned the value of subtlety, how to make progress without drawing unnecessary attention, how to build momentum quietly, and how to let outcomes speak for themselves. The satisfaction of each win, no matter how small, fueled the next move. I had become a master of silent accumulation, stacking achievements that would one day leave no room for doubt about my capability. And yet, despite all these victories, I didn't lose sight of my ultimate goal. The scholarship was only the beginning. I continued to nurture my skills, expand my network, and explore opportunities that would give me independence. Every decision was deliberate, every action a step toward the day I would fully reclaim my life from the family that had underestimated me. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. They were about to realize that the quiet one in the corner had been preparing all along. By the end of this period, the transformation was undeniable. I had evolved from a silent sufferer into a strategic, confident, unstoppable force. My family still clung to their assumptions, but their foundation of control was cracking. Every success, every letter of recognition, every earned opportunity chipped away at their belief that I was powerless. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that the most impactful moments, the ones that would truly leave them stunned, were yet to come. I had the scholarship. I had victories stacking quietly behind their backs. But the real test was about to begin, the moment I would fully step into my power and confront the world they thought they controlled. The months following the scholarship win felt like waking from a long, suffocating dream. I had not only secured a new path for myself, but also glimpsed a world where my worth was measured by nothing other than my own efforts. Slowly, deliberately, I began asserting my independence. The first step was small but symbolic. I moved my study desk near the window instead of the corner they had designated for me, taking control of my personal space for the first time in years. It was subtle, almost invisible to them, but it felt like a quiet rebellion, a statement that my life was no longer dictated by anyone else. At school, I started taking on leadership roles. Group projects that once seemed intimidating now became opportunities to showcase my skills. I spoke confidently in presentations, offered solutions that impressed my teachers, and gradually earned the respect of my peers. Each recognition, each nod of approval was a quiet reminder that my value was no longer tethered to my family's opinion. Even Victoria noticed the change, though she dismissed it casually, assuming it was just a phase. She had no idea how calculated my rise had been. The countless late nights, the internships, the skill building, the strategy of positioning myself for success. At home, things began to shift as well. I took up part-time freelance projects, managing my own earnings and budgeting meticulously. For the first time, I had real financial control. The freedom that came with it was intoxicating. I could buy books that interested me, save for small goals, and invest in my skills without having to ask permission. Victoria, who had always flaunted her spending power, found herself silently competing for attention as I quietly built my own achievements. Mom occasionally glanced at my earnings and accomplishments, but her approval was still lukewarm and hesitant. Dad remained confident in his judgment, assuming I was still just a student under his oversight. They didn't realize that their assumptions were becoming obsolete with each passing day. The real turning point, however, was when I started making decisions that directly contradicted the family's expectations. One evening, they suggested a weekend family trip, expecting my compliance. Instead, I politely declined, citing a project deadline and work commitments. There was a flicker of surprise, then subtle disapproval, but I remained unwavering. That small act of autonomy sent a shockwave through their perception of control. They realized I was no longer their obedient, predictable daughter. I was operating according to my own schedule, my own priorities, and my own ambitions. I also began forming meaningful relationships outside the family. Mentors from my internship, peers from school, and even acquaintances from community programs became my network. Each connection expanded my perspective, bringing insights and opportunities that Victoria and the family were oblivious to. With every conversation and collaboration, I felt my independence solidifying. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving in a space they had never provided me. At home, the cracks in their assumptions began to show in subtle but telling ways. Victoria tried to assert her dominance through sarcasm and condescension, but her words started to lose power over me. The more I succeeded, the more her attempts at intimidation faltered. Mom occasionally tried to intervene, offering unsolicited advice, but I had learned to accept guidance selectively, filtering out the control from the support. Even Dad's occasional criticisms felt less impactful, like echoes from a past version of authority that no longer held sway over my choices. The psychological impact on them became evident during family dinners. Victoria would subtly compare herself to me as if she hoped I would falter, but I had learned to remain calm, to smile politely, and to let results speak louder than words. Mom sometimes tried to redirect conversations to highlight Victoria's achievements, but I was no longer reactive. I had learned to remain composed, letting the momentum of my accomplishments gradually reshape the household dynamics. Dad, who once assumed I was malleable, began to sense the shift, though he rarely acknowledged it aloud. Internally, I felt a profound transformation. The fear and resentment that had once defined my relationship with my family were replaced by clarity, strategy, and self-respect. I realized that independence wasn't just about financial control or achievements, it was about mindset. I had reclaimed my mental space, my sense of agency, and my ability to make choices without fear of backlash. Every small victory reinforced my confidence, creating a self-sustaining cycle of empowerment. By the end of this period, I had quietly, strategically shaken the foundations of my family's control. My independence was no longer just an idea, it was a living reality. The family that had once dismissed me as powerless was starting to sense that their assumptions were flawed. I was no longer invisible, no longer silent, and certainly no longer under anyone's control. The seeds of quiet revolution were sown, and the next phase of my journey, where my successes would no longer be subtle but impossible to ignore, was on the horizon. I had claimed my independence and shifted the balance of power, but the real challenge was coming. The moment when my family would finally see that I was no longer the powerless daughter they once controlled. The day Victoria walked into my office, expecting to assert her control, was the day everything changed. She had always assumed that my success was fragile, that I would bend under pressure, that I was still the powerless daughter she had tormented for years. But this time, she stepped into a space I had built entirely on my own terms. The walls were lined with awards, my achievements framed and proudly displayed. My team was present, silently acknowledging the respect I had earned. Her confident smirk faltered almost immediately. I greeted her politely but firmly, a stark contrast to the submissive version of myself she remembered. "Victoria," I said, "I'm glad you came, but things have changed." My tone was calm, yet it carried the weight of years of struggle, planning, and silent victories. She tried to dismiss it with a laugh, but the glance around the room, the evidence of my independence and accomplishments, spoke louder than any words. It wasn't just about money or career success anymore. I revealed, with quiet precision, how I had been quietly building my empire, skills, networks, financial independence, and reputation, all while she assumed I was powerless. I outlined contracts, clients, and projects she had no influence over. Each revelation was a blow to the illusion of control she had maintained. The room was silent except for my voice, calm and unwavering as the truth slowly settled in. Victoria's eyes widened as she realized she had misjudged me entirely. The family dynamics that had once suffocated me were finally exposed for what they were. My parents, who had long ignored my potential, now witnessed the tangible proof of my resilience. Their doubts, dismissals, and assumptions had no place in the reality I had created. What was once an invisible, powerless daughter had become a force they could not manipulate or contain. The psychological shift was undeniable. Respect was no longer optional. It was inevitable. But beyond proving them wrong, the moment was about closure. I didn't yell, I didn't attack. Instead, I demonstrated that my independence was rooted in self-respect and strength, not revenge. I had grown beyond their judgment, their manipulation, and their expectations. Every project I led, every milestone I achieved, had been a step toward reclaiming my life, not to punish them, but to free myself. Victoria's attempts to regain power crumbled under the weight of evidence and composure. She finally left, defeated, her assumptions shattered. My parents, though silent, could no longer ignore the truth. I had carved my own path, and no one, not even family, could dictate my worth or destiny. In the weeks that followed, life became steadier, calmer, and more empowering. I continued building my career, expanding my network, and mentoring others, all while maintaining the independence I had fought for. My story became a testament to resilience, the ability to rise above manipulation, reclaim control, and assert one's worth without bitterness. The transformation was complete. I had taken back my voice, my space, and my life. The family that once silenced me now saw the person I had become, not the obedient child they assumed, but an empowered, self-reliant individual who had mastered her destiny. The struggle was ended, but the victory wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It was proof that patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in oneself can turn years of oppression into a platform for success and freedom. I didn't just survive my family's control, I rose above it, and in doing so, I proved that no lie, no manipulation, and no obstacle can stop someone determined to reclaim their life.